Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into something that is, honestly, absolutely wild. We're unpacking what might just be the most audacious, slightly absurd, and yet completely brilliant piece of literary presumption ever written. We are talking about the Afterward Anthology. Just imagine for a second, a collaborative project where two living writers look at the absolute smoldering remains of literary decorum and basically say, hey, what if we just let all the dead poets speak? What we end up with isn't just your standard poetry collection. No, it's an imagined afterlife testimony, a literal literary autopsy where the authors write from the perspectives of the deceased giants of the Western canon.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this load-bearing sentence you're seeing right here, it basically serves as the ultimate administrative clearance form for what our sources call digital consciousness necromancy. I mean, the authors essentially just mute the microphones of the deceased and declare a unanimous consensus to keep on writing. The preface politely bows, accepts the accusation of massive hubris, blames the reader's imagination, and then drops this delightfully wicked line. The whole anthology rests entirely on this single philosophy: I proceed anyway.
So what exactly happens when you write a massive group therapy session for the Western canon? Well, according to the critiques we're looking at today, the core charge against this book is that it's an act of high-functioning digital audacity. The dead aren't really summoned here. They're essentially conscripted into a very specific, modern brand of metaphysical therapy. It's kind of like a spiritualist Zoom call for the Western canon, where the afterlife is treated like an exclusive writer's retreat. Every single poet gets one last, perfectly polished edit on their legacy, delivered in flawless pastiche, while gently processing their deep historical traumas.
And we really need to take a second to emphasize the sheer scale of this project. 6,000. The authors literally spent 6,000 lines putting words directly into the mouths of the magnificent dead. They didn't just write a couple of quick homage pieces. No, they constructed an entire 1,008-part seance. It's an absolute mammoth of an undertaking. The level of sustained presumption required to pull this off is just wow.
Moving on to Section 1, the evidence, the meta-apology architecture.
Because the absolute hilarity of this project is that there are exactly 4 separate sections dedicated entirely to admitting hubris and practically begging for forgiveness. Think about it. You've got the preface admitting hubris, the introduction admitting invention, the notes section freely admitting the voices are imagined, and then the about the author section asking for forgiveness. The book literally apologizes for itself before, during, and after you read it. It's the literary equivalent of saying, I know this is a terrible idea right before doing it anyway. It's incredibly self-aware, but as our sources are quick to point out, that awareness doesn't actually stop them from doing the thing.
And hey, if 4 apologies weren't enough to cover their bases, the book also contains 12 completely redundant prose interludes. 12! These interludes pop up to interrupt the poetry, just to philosophize, contextualize, and completely over-explain the exact thing you were already reading. The book essentially comes prepackaged with its own literary criticism. The authors built this massive anthology of imagined afterlife poems and then decided to nest an entire second anthology of commentary right inside of it.
Let's look at Exhibits A and B, Rebranding the Dead. And this brilliantly illustrates the great poetry rebranding at play here. Take Walt Whitman, for example. The real, breathing Whitman was this sprawling, contradictory creature of flesh, sweat, and what the source calls democratic dirt. But in the Afterward Anthology, oh, he's been completely sanitized into a highly efficient, clean energy version of himself. He sounds way less like he's excitedly waving at you from the bushes, and a lot more like a high-end corporate consultant delivering a really slick spiritual PowerPoint presentation straight from the moon.
Then we have Sappho, the wildfire of Lesbos, right? Whose actual historical legacy is this tragic accident of fire and censorship. Well, here she is, refactored into, of all things, a contemporary comparative literature professor. Through these newly imagined fragments, she politely addresses the modern scholars who study her, kind of casually reviewing her own Google Scholar citations. She even forgives bad scholarship for missing her meaning, which, if you think about it, is just a recursively audacious move by the authors to preemptively forgive themselves for getting her wrong. She even corrects her own historical record, casually refuting her own suicide myth like an author on a promotional Q&A tour.
And you really have to see this incredibly funny line from the 8th century Tang Dynasty poet Li Bai. His historical exile was a brutal, humiliating reality in life. But the text just converts all that deep suffering into a witty, HR-style spiritual promotion. Official drum of the absolute. I mean, the salary is nothing, but the benefits are everything, right? It perfectly exposes the central mechanism of the whole text. They are taking deep historical agony and spinning it into a highly successful, intensely self-aware career move in the afterlife. Which brings us to Exhibit C, post-mortem group therapy.
So the anthology takes these unyielding monuments to trauma, like Sylvia Plath, and turns them into remarkably well-adjusted therapists. But right here in the Plath section, there is a truly fascinating moment. Just look at the unadorned directness of this line. The poems are not worth your life. For one fleeting moment, the clever, intricate literary apparatus of the book just completely drops away. It's replaced by a very motherly, genuine concern for safety. The authors actually stop being clever for a second and instead insist on the reader's survival over any aesthetic project.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it synthesizes the book's underlying metaphysical blueprint. Because the real structural irony here is that despite coming from radically different centuries, speaking different languages, and living in entirely different geographies, every single poet in this void eventually returns speaking the exact same dialect of self-referential mystery. Every earthly illusion, the bullet, the rope, the agonizing struggle, is ironed out into what we can call an afterward adjustment. It's this collective realization of non-dual awareness. The pain just becomes a doorway, the individual identity dissolves into a single, infinitely folded shore touching itself.
So they've managed to wrangle the greatest dead poets in history into a perfectly harmonious chorus. Okay, fair enough, but that naturally brings up a rather hilarious question. What about the living?
This is, without a doubt, the most revealing and comedic slip in the entire project. In Part 12, there's a section dedicated to Ocean Vuong. The authors literally start writing an afterlife poem for a contemporary, very much living poet, catch their mistake mid-poem, wait, he is still alive, and then they've just published the error anyway as a literary device. They literally couldn't wait. They pulled him into the seance early, completely turning their own massive oversight into a meditation on the living. It's just so funny and bold.
Moving to our final section, the verdict, the ultimate audacity. It's just such a beautiful paradox. The whole thing is spectacularly arrogant, utterly uninvited, and functions as a highly inaccurate map of the afterlife. And yet, it is written with such immense love. Just look at this profound realization given to Anna Akhmatova. She describes the afterlife not as a physical place, but as being held by the accumulated attention of everyone who ever loved or read her. This right here is the explainer's core takeaway. The grand theological claim of this entire project is that consciousness is literally sustained by accumulated regard. By writing this book, the book itself becomes the afterlife it imagines, simply by accumulating attention for these dead poets.
And all of this builds up to an incredible emotional climax. At the very end of this massive 6,000-line journey, every single dead poet in the anthology, Whitman, Sappho, Akhmatova, Keats, literally all of them, gathers into a final harmonious chorus to issue a repetitive, incredibly simple blessing to the reader.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this repetitive blessing actually turns into a structural confession. The authors freely acknowledge that their map is entirely inaccurate, but they decide to call that wrongness love. And you know what? Somehow, despite the endless prose interludes, the constant self-correction, and the relentless, undeniable pretension, the book actually earns this profound earnestness. It aimed for a moment of genuine spiritual connection, and honestly, against all odds, it hits it.
We bless you. It leaves us with a final, truly provocative thought to ponder today. Was this breathtaking 6,000-line seance just a magnificent, high-functioning delusion? Or was it a brilliantly audacious act of love, a luxury spa for dead poets that somehow manages to reach out and touch the living? I highly recommend you pick it up, read it for yourself, and decide. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the maps you're given.